The death of Mrs. Bailey brought a mixture of sadness and relief to our family. Sadness because we lost a close friend. Relief because she was a demanding responsibility. Mrs. Bailey was an elderly woman confined to a wheelchair, unable to clip her own toenails or wash her own hair. For 5 years, Peggy had shopped for Mrs. Bailey's groceries and taken her to the bank and the doctor. Mrs. Bailey spent her holidays and other special days in our home, and in the end, our sadness at her death was as much for the tragedy of her life as it was for the loss of a close friend. To the end, Mrs. Bailey would not move from her home. Although the neighborhood became dangerous and she was chronically afraid, her fear of leaving was greater than her fear of remaining. Her only place of security was behind the dead bolts and drawn blinds of the house that held a lifetime of memories. Day after day, Mrs. Bailey sat in her wheelchair, lights dimmed, tending to her private affairs. Her affairs? Stacking old bills and years of canceled checks on a dining room table no longer used for eating. Folding and neatly storing paper bags, torn pieces of old sheets, rubber bands, stockings, and undergarments that were long since retired from active duty. Mrs. Bailey threw away nothing, absolutely nothing, except refuse itself. Hoarding had become her way of life. Dust and decay were her unwanted but constant companions. It had not always been this way. Once her house was full of life. The wind blew through curtains and open windows. There was laughter and giving. A family invested itself, lavishing love on a child, toiling happily for the joys of the moment and the dreams of the future. Then Mr. Bailey died. Mrs. Bailey and her son clung to each other for comfort. Gradually, her selfless love became controlling, suffocating. A life-giving relationship became deadly. There was hard work, bad financial times, more clutching. The son married and moved away, another loss. Neighbors moved too. She was now alone. Sturdier locks were installed on the doors, the blinds were lowered. She became fiercely independent. She conserved money, electricity, papers, cardboard boxes. More years slipped away. Mrs. Bailey saved more and more of what she had less and less need for. Her health began to fail. She obtained a wheelchair to conserve physical energy and prevent falls. She ceased to spend. Her growing savings accounts and insurance policies were no longer a comfort, and she begrudged every expense of living. Food became as distasteful to her as the thought of paying for it. She even conserved her love, meting out only what she was sure would be returned. Mrs. Bailey hoarded every possession but life itself, and now that was gone. But her death actually occurred years before her heart stopped beating. Her death was signaled when she first began to clutch at life. If you would save your life, you will lose it. But if you lose your life for my sake, you will find it. Matthew 16:25. The church is engaged in a similar struggle. We are in a death drift that moves us from serving to preserving. We feel it carrying us along. Our spontaneous fellowship soon becomes a program. Bearing one another's burdens becomes a budget line item. Self-sacrificing friends become paid professionals with titles: counselor, minister, director, and salary packages, longevity guarantees, and retirement benefits. Our meeting places turn into holy places with stained glass, polished oak, and locks. Taking no thought for tomorrow becomes sentimental rhetoric as we build bigger barns and amass insurance and endowments and reserve funds against the unpredictable events of our future. But the church has no future. We have only the present. In this present moment, we must spend, lavish, and give away our tomorrows for the sake of His kingdom today. In short, we must die. Today. That is the only way to save our lives. The church is called to live at Golgotha. If perchance tomorrow morning we discover that our depleted spirits have a new supply of energy, that the emptied offering plate is full once again, and from sacrificial dreams, whole new dimensions of life have burst forth, then we will begin to understand something of what the resurrection is about. On the other side of death, each death, stands our risen Lord, and he beckons us.